Well, look, I'm going to open with the same preface that will always open these until the Tina movie dies. This is not an audition to make a film based on the screenplay just titled Weeded Out. I am appearing in my role as a satirist, as a leader of a political party, and not as an actor. I may talk about things which have to do with the creative arts, but this is not an audition to be an actor. It is not an audition to be involved in plays, musicals, or operas on the stage. And if you cease telling me to be a stage actor, I might actually come and review your shows. Leave me alone. I don't want to be on the stage. I don't want to be on the screen unless it's in my capacity as a presenter. I think I'm a good presenter. I think I'm a good broadcaster. I don't think I'm an actor, and I don't want to be. Now, that's all been said. Here's the part that the world is actually interested in, which is, what did it mean to you to have Stephen Sondheim take an interest in your music? Well, I mean, first I need to clear up, some misconceptions here. I mean, by the time I was 18, I was already a very good musician. I was already winning scholarships and stuff, and I come from a musical family. So my grandmother, Ruth, was a piano teacher. My mum was a nightclub singer and also a piano teacher, but not like complicated piano teaching. My mum only did sort of beginner students, but Ruth was head of music at Middleton Grange, which is a high school in Christchurch, for about 10 years. Ruth was a very well-known musician in Christchurch, particularly as an accompanist. And she studied with a man called George Martin. No, not the guy from the Beatles, but just a music teacher in Christchurch named George Martin, who was apparently very good. So going back to Sondheim. So the first time that I became aware of who he was when the movie of Sweeney Todd came out. I was, 12, 13, year 10 at school when it came out, and I really enjoyed it. And I spent like 2 or 3 weeks telling everyone to watch it, even though it was a musical. And so, it's a musical, but it's actually really good, even with Johnny Depp singing and not like a real opera singer. I'd never heard the stage version, so how was I to know? I just thought, gee, this is quite good. This is good music, But again, it was a passing fancy. I didn't deep dive into his music based on the movie of Sweeney Todd. Then I came back to Sondheim's music. Because I was getting into musicals, properly into musicals. Because when I was young, musicals were just something that I went to because my mum likes shows. And the kind of shows that people were putting on in Christchurch were generally English-based musicals, not American-based musicals. I mean, I went to see Oliver, and I went to see, and everyone thought it was all about Andrew Lloyd Webber. That was just the thing. Everyone liked Andrew's stuff. We did a medley of his Phantom in concert band. I was playing trombone. So that was the vibe. People really seemed to think that. Then I was watching the Buffy series after the Christchurch earthquakes and listening to the commentary of the musical episode. He referenced Sondheim and counterpoint numbers. Now, having seen the film of Sweeney Todd, I didn't really realise that Sweeney Todd was like this incredibly densely written piece of choral music as well. So I didn't play the album. I actually played Into the Woods, and they call it Gesamtkunstwerk in German, but that's what I heard in the opening number of Into the Woods from the cast album as opposed to film soundtracks, right? The opening number for Into the Woods is exact. To me, it was like all the things that I was doing, because I sang in choir, I played in orchestra and concert band, and big band as a trombone player, and I was a rhythm guitar player, and I liked classical music in a general sense as well as, doing it. I actually liked to listen to it. It wasn't the only thing I listened to, but it was something that I did listen to. So I heard Into the Woods, and I was like, he's put it all together, he's done all these things, and I didn't realise at the time that he didn't orchestrate his own music. I only found that out a bit later. I listened. So Into the Woods, I was like, so this is what I should be doing, is something like this. Because obviously my teacher, Michael Bell, was into musicals and had written a musical, so it wasn't like I was coming from a novice perspective of never having been involved, never having seen a show. No, I was fairly well aware of what a musical was. I just thought a lot of them weren't very good, which is actually something that Sondheim also believed. So then, so then from year 13, the next step was, after I found out about the music, I found out that you could, then I was like, how did he do that with the scansion and the lyrics? How's it possible? I'd never heard anyone actually scan English correctly, And Steve Sondheim is the absolute master of scansion. He's not the best lyricist. I mean, I think Harnack is a superior lyricist in pretty much every possible way, but the scansion, the set and prosody of Sondheim's music is unequaled. And that's why people think it sounds clever, is because it sounds like human beings. It doesn't sound like opera singers. And he has a whole thing about that. Whereas obviously I'm a trained singer and he wasn't, so I feel differently. But also I think that with the right singer, you can get whatever you want, but you have to know their limitations. And those kind of things that he talks about a lot in the book. So I read Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat, and then I sent him a letter about the idea. I thought the exercise musical thing was a good idea. And I just thought I'd send him a letter because I'd read that he was very generous with his time and often replied to students. So I thought, hey, let's give it a shot. As for what happened after the letter, well, I mean, Mark never mentioned that he was keeping Steve up to date with what I was doing. The university never mentioned it either. So I presumed that he had ghosted me and that, for whatever reason he didn't want to reply to my reply. But anyway, the point is, I don't actually think his legacy is going to be as complicated as people in the theatre world think it is going to be. He was a harsh critic, and I'm expecting that the letters to Arthur Lawrence that the Library of Congress is about to publish will emphasise this. He was a harsh critic. He was an opinionated man, and he came of age in an era where you had to be. Whereas this day and age, actually, the soft power is the people who don't criticise to your face. The ones who keep it all hidden and secret and say awful things behind your back, they have power now. But in the old days, it was the people who could actually speak it out, say, that wasn't a good show, that sucked. People don't say that, in New Zealand at least. Good Lord, Lord knows I would rather people were saying to me, I hate the documentary and I hate your musicals, than polite, that was nice. So, I don't really have much to say about his legacy. The main thing which might be involved in his legacy is I have heard rumours that Sondheim was involved with kink, but gay man in New York in the 1970s, 1980s, who wouldn't have been? The real problem is that the gay, he's not really like a gay musicals writer, and even though he was gay and obviously had male partners of much younger age, but he's not a gay hero. He's not really a gay icon, in the same way that, say, Jerry Herman is, because Sondheim was never comfortable with being gay, and I think that's something which you do see in the musicals, is that I wouldn't say that he's bisexual. He never really pursued a sexual relationship with a woman, though apparently him and Mary Rogers lived together for a while. They were going to get married, but ultimately, as my friend Evie said to me, wrong equipment. I think that's way more important than people think when it comes to sexual chemistry. But he was a great guy. And the one thing I will say about Steve's legacy is I have never heard, read, or been intimated a single story about him inappropriately touching anyone or coming on to anyone inappropriately. Given the dozens, if not hundreds, of people that he must have mentored over the years, that is an impressive feat. That guy, to me, he was never anything other than just some guy who was interested in what I was doing, and I wouldn't say he kept his opinions to himself, but he let me develop at my own pace, and I was never pressured to come to New York and make it on Broadway, because obviously he'd actually left Broadway. I think what people don't really understand about Steve's career is that it really takes place in two halves, and it's not just a question of Hal Prince and Leonard Bernstein as opposed to James Lapine. It's to do with the structures of how the shows were done. So the stuff that he did from West Side Story through to Merrily We Roll Along is entirely structured around the commercial theatre of Broadway. These shows are supposed to run, they were supposed to pay back the investors, they were supposed to get people into the seats and buy the cast album. From Sunday forward, there's only one show of his that premiered on Broadway, and it still had multiple workshop readings through the sort of new process, which is the workshop process, which didn't really exist in the 50s. In fact, Sondheim claims to have pioneered the workshop process with a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. So that process didn't really exist until the late 70s, and all the Sondheim's musicals after Merrily We Roll Along were done as non-commercial pieces for like Playwrights Horizons or public theatre, public theatre literally, but also that's the name of a company in New York. So he was structured. So the structure changed, and you see his shows become different as a result. One can also say that the major difference is that from Sweeney forward, all the shows tried out in New York. The earlier shows tried out in Boston and Philadelphia and New Haven, but Sweeney Todd was the first major musical to. They cannibalized their previews or something, but they did the warm-up month in New York, and apparently that actually backfired with Merrily, and that's why it was a failure. It was because the word of mouth from the tryouts was terrible. And it's also important to note that even though he worked in the commercial medium musicals, A Little Night Music was the only real hit of his, in terms of it ran several years and basically paid off Company and Follies. So he never really wrote a great commercial hit musical that was amazingly successful in the first run, except for Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. So all of his musicals had these great afterlives. They did okay, they did well, they got good reviews, but no one came on Broadway. But then after the records came out and people did them in London or did them elsewhere, LA as well, for example, then Sweeney Todd became popular. And then, Company became popular, not because of the Company did all right on Broadway, but yeah. So I came at musicals thinking I could make a living off it, and that there would be ancillary rights to the songs, that if I published the songs I might make money off them. These were all things which, sort of, because this guy was interested, they seemed realistic, not because I was going to use his name to get me in the door or anything like that. I actually didn't want people to know that I'd, sought out Sondheim for advice. I really didn't want people to know because I thought they'd look at me differently. And also I just felt, I still had to do the bloody thing, right? So at the end of the day, I had to make my own songs, my own musicals. I had to put them on, and whether he was watching my YouTube clips, you can't really sort of determine stuff like that. But yeah, the main thing to note, from like a humanistic standpoint, is I'd always been taught as a composer up until Steve got involved that you couldn't give everyone a moment. You had to. The dictates of music didn't allow you to give everyone a moment, whereas the one thing that Sondheim really is good at, which no other writer really can do, is that he gives everyone a moment. If it's a chorus number, he gives literally everyone in the chorus some chance to sing a solo line, but in most of his stuff. So that's different to how most people do it. But it's also fair to say he didn't write a lot of that stuff himself. Gimignani was actually primarily responsible for the vocal arrangements of the sort of post-company musicals. He didn't actually, and even with the company chorale, he didn't do it entirely himself. Harold Hastings did rewrite bits of it, but not much apparently. But actually, the real reason that people should be interested is not because of the musical theatre stuff, it's because Sondheim was a massive film buff and a real film fan, and had made movies himself, and that's what was interesting about the tape, and that's what's interesting about the discussion that took place. Was I was like maybe I was the only person who thought let's do it for movies because everyone else just wanted to make stage shows, but I wanted to make a movie, and that's what the tape is about. Is if you're going to make a movie musical, well, what's important then? Are they the same things that are important for a stage musical? And the answer is basically no. There are different requirements for a film musical. I couldn't really put them into words, but there are just differences between the mediums, and I was kind of annoyed that he ghosted me because I actually wanted to have the discussion, but I suppose that he probably read the letter and saw my point, and that's why there wasn't a reply. And you can actually see like the stuff, if I was to show you the reply that I wrote to him, you'd see a lot of stuff that actually did end up being part of Portrait of the Nights. So it's true that he sort of gave me ideas, but he didn't give me notes in a conventional sense. He didn't pull apart my song and say that rhyme sucks or that bar sucks. It was just a general sense of, well, put these things in in your kete, and then you'll understand more about what might make a good musical. He wasn't telling me a specific story to tell. He wasn't telling me how to do it. He was just saying, these are the things you might need to think about to make a movie musical that's as compelling as a stage musical as when it's done well. I actually did cry when he died, by the way, even though I'm famously not particularly emotional in terms of showing my emotions. But yeah, I think he was very important in terms of like giving me something to sort of fight, to both sort of emulate but also rebel against. You know, having this like big name composer who I sort of had a bit of a sort of friendship with, and that's how I sort of saw it. You know, when I listened to Here We Are, was, oh, my pen pal finally wrote me back. So that's how I felt listening to that score. It was like and yeah, so I didn't really like the album so much of Here We Are. I don't think it sounds, but the actual recording of the show was quite interesting. I don't like the way they produce Broadway albums anymore. One thing I would do if I went to New York is tell them a bunch of things about what I think suck about the way that modern cast albums are recorded. And part of it is time constraints, but a lot of it is just crappy using digital technology in a really crappy way. You know, and using far too many spot mics and doing far too many things to the sound. It really shouldn't be changed that much from how it sounds in the bloody room. If you want it to sound good, spot mics only make it sound lamer. 10 pieces sounds good if you use the room mics. 10 pieces doesn't sound good if you use a bunch of spot mics. And you can't auto-tune the singers because that is A, disingenuous, and B, doesn't sound all that great. It creates ugliness in the record that you wouldn't get if you just chose not to auto-tune them. Just choose not to auto-tune them. Just put it out there and see if people think it sounds better. Because that's what we didn't do. Only Hannah is tuned in Portrait of the Night, and only specific notes. It's not like we went through the entire song and tuned to it. You know, it's really just not on my couch for the most part. Maybe a couple of notes in here and now. But yeah, Philip is completely untuned. There is absolutely no auto-tune on Philip in Portrait of the Night. There is absolutely no auto-tune on myself or Barbara in These Was Meant for Someone. That is because auto-tune is not the way to make a good cast album. Or frankly, a good rock album for that matter too. Like, I get it in rap. I understand the value of auto-tune in rap and hip-hop. I don't think it has value in other styles of music because it's a different sound. So yeah, those are my opinions. Whether I could expand Pan's Preludes to a full-size symphony orchestra, no, because then the guitar would get lost. The size of the ensemble is dictated by the limits of a classical guitar. Even if I was to amplify it, it would sound really tinny against a 50-piece orchestra, but against a 25-piece orchestra or 30-piece orchestra, which is about what Pan is intended to be, then yeah, the guitar should be able to sound out over that fairly well. Based on, like I've heard the Rodrigo Concerto de Aranjuez for it's about 2 or 3 times with NZSO, and it does work. I actually heard a guy do it completely unamplified with the right size orchestra, and it was actually pretty good. So yeah, there's no reason that Pan couldn't be done with the orchestrations that I want, and a guitar player who, like Chris Everest, who I've actually asked to play it, he's kind of insisted that I use some kind of microphone, whereas he just thinks that otherwise the sound, you're sort of playing out too much and you end up with a slightly ugly sort of sound. So he wants a microphone, not to not project, but just to support the guitar rather than to, sort of be the only reason we can even hear it. In terms of my own views, I've always wanted to make a movie of Follies. So, if people in America really want to see what I'll do with one of Steve's pieces, that's the one I'm actually interested in. Despite Richard apparently having heard me sing one of the songs from Merrily and wanting me to do something in that, but I just can't play a male role. I don't want to sing a male role, and there's no real way of making Charlie or Frank a trans person. So, yeah, I'm not going to be singing that stuff. But I do think that I have a better singing voice than most of the people in Hollywood, and actually, I think I'm about equal with most New York singers. Better than some, not as good as others. But different because I'm not just a show singer, I can do lots of different styles quite effectively. But singing is not my passion. Singing is just something that I do because I like to sing, but I don't really want to professionalise my singing. I don't really think that's the way to go for me. And also, the reason people want me to sing is actually because they just don't like my new stuff. I think one thing I have noticed is that my career is following Steve's template, which is that Portrait of a Night didn't really land all that much when it came out, but 3 years after it came out, people in New Zealand were, it had cultural significance, particularly by the time we got it into Ngā Taonga and New Zealand on screen. Yeah, the film had a certain degree of cultural significance, and that's been true of everything. These Words Meant for Someone premiered 5 years before I made that final video, which people actually thought was something exciting and new, and Some Kind of Love. Manny had done that, but I didn't realise he'd actually made that film until fairly recently, and that's why I put together the trilogies. But I finally saw that he'd actually cut Some Kind of Love together. But yeah, the overall cumulative impact. Same with the cannabis stuff. 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, the cannabis activism had a limited impact on society. But 2 more years of me continuing the kaupapa and advertising on Facebook, and things have changed. There really is a new vibe of tolerance that is spreading, and the documentary is definitely part of that. If you take a broad view, probably something like 5 or 10% of the country has seen at least something to do with the documentary. So, yeah. I'm not quite like Sinead, who says, journalism works even if you aren't a consumer of it. I'd like to think that, but I do think that that statistics are important, and a lot of people did watch it, so that was good. Yeah, I was going to do something about Don as well. I'd say Don's relationship with me is very different, because I'll just start with I trolled him rather than sending him an email, but also, I think that Don has been probably keeping track of me for a bit longer than I thought. People have been comparing me to Don McGlashan for a very long time, sort of subtly and also overtly. So it's completely different. My relationship with Don is, this is the guy who everyone says I'm like, whereas people didn't really say, oh, you're like Stephen Sondheim. So, I didn't have the same thing about it. Whereas people keep on saying, oh, do what Don does, be more like Don. Or basically people wanted me to be a rock star because I played the guitar and I sang about, that's what happened at music school. And now they've actually done it, now they want me to come back, because now they think, oh, you're whole, you're complete, you're ready to be part of our society. And I'm actually saying to them, no, I'm a composer. I got good at singing so I could do demos of my own songs, not so I could be a rock star on the stage. Because as I say, Sondheim's all about, the art as a form of teaching. I'm not so much on the teaching, being the tranny who literally can't teach kids because of the bulge in my pants. So I like to talk about cultural transmission. When you teach someone to sing a song, as opposed to everyone writing their own stuff, or worse yet, people not singing in public at all, then what you're doing is that you are literally passing on knowledge. Songs contain information because rhymes help people to remember things. And that's what I learned from Steve Sondheim.